Hi everyone, this is Bo from Bo to Fitness, and I am back with a really interesting video. This one is the worst foods you can eat that make you really fat. This one I find is really fascinating because when we look at the science behind this, it really helps us to understand why some foods really promote weight gain, and they're very difficult to it's very difficult to stay on any kind of diet or eating plan while these foods are included in your meal plan. It's not to say it's impossible. Some people can work them in a little bit, but as we're going to see here, when we look at why these foods promote weight gain, it's going to get us insight as to why we have to be very careful with these foods. Now, on the right-hand side here, we're going to look a little bit at some of the better foods. But we're going to have a whole nother video that's going to go into this a little bit more in depth as far as the best weight loss foods. We'll only touch on that briefly today. So let's look at over here. You like my picture here? Let's look at why these foods over here are the worst foods when it comes to weight loss and why they really make you fat. And let's talk a little bit about the research that went behind this. So this isn't just some random list that I created. This is actually from a study done at the University of Michigan, and it was really looking at studying how foods have addictive properties and how many times many foods will, for many people, will be very similar to drugs of addiction. Now some of the elements of addiction that you see associated with these foods on the left here, we have things like people will report feeling like a loss of control, a very emotional association with food, a preoccupation with food, so they're thinking about it all the time. I just can't wait to go to that restaurant and get that meal again. Foods that are rapidly absorbed. You look at drugs that are very addictive, they absorb very quickly. So foods are processed so that when you eat them, even when you chew them, they don't really take much chewing. They just swallow them and they absorb very quickly. And high dose. So again, foods are concentrated. Processed foods are very concentrated. And when they're concentrated, it means you get a very high dose, or what we would call very high calorie density per bite. And this is the same thing you see in drugs of addiction. Now, in addition to the addictive properties of these foods, there are certain elements of the foods that have a lot to do with why they're so weight gain promoting. So we can see that foods that are processed foods like these here are very low in fiber, water, and protein. So their volume is very reduced. And so you get a lot of really yummy stuff without the good nutritious stuff that fills you up. So you take those things out, it ends up just concentrating the addictive properties of those foods and making them very difficult to not overeat. We also see that there is when fats and sugars are combined, this is one of the key things they mentioned in the study, and you see this in many other studies as well, is that in nature, foods that really don't contain fat and sugar at the same time. And this is really important because, and you think about almost any natural food, whether it be an animal food or a plant food or any other natural food. You can think of like, let's say, venison, an animal food. It's fat and protein, but the one thing that's missing is the carbohydrate. On the other hand, if we were to think of like, let's say, a banana, it's going to be carbohydrate, a little bit of protein, little to no fat. And even when there is fat present in these higher carbohydrate foods, it's very small amount and it's of a very particular kind. And so we see that in nature, there is no fat and sugar combined in foods, with the exception of maybe one food, and that's usually milk. And this is interesting because we see that milk has some unique properties about it that are related to why it is a weight gain food. Milk is designed to make the baby want to eat very often, to make the baby be quiet and tired so it doesn't attract predators, to make the baby grow very quickly, especially get a big fat layer in its brain and around its organs, and it's even under its skin so that it can be insulated away from the elements. And so essentially it's a food that is meant to make a baby or a person or an animal tired, hungry. So we want repeat feedings. Any mother who is nursing, for example, and her baby doesn't want to eat, she's going to freak out because she's thinking, he should be eating, should be growing. And so milk is really set up, this combination of sugar and fat is set up when they're mixed together. The biology of it is set up in such a way that it promotes frequent feeding, fatigue or being tired, calm down, rapid weight gain, and essentially this increased desire to want to eat even more food, right? So this combination of fats and sugars we see really spikes the opioid, dopamine, pleasure centers, the reward centers of the brain get flooded with these things and really make us want to continue to consume them. You want to make animals fat in the lab. You don't just feed them a high sugar diet, and you don't even feed them a high fat diet. What you do is you feed them a high sugar, high fat diet. And this is one of the things the researchers mentioned in the study as well, that when you combine fats and sugars together, they cause rapid weight gain. And you'll notice that when we look at this list, this is exactly what we kind of see here. Now, to give you a little insight as to how this list was created, what the researchers did was they basically they did a whole bunch, I think it was I don't know, 300 some odd students or so that were involved in this. And what they did is they had to rate foods based upon their pleasure, the way how addictive they felt, how much they craved them, and then they created essentially a ranking system. So from the most addictive down to the least addictive foods. This is kind of interesting because we can see that it actually serves to give us an insight as to what are some of the most filling, satisfying foods, the least addictive foods that we're less likely to overeat, all the way down to what are the most addictive foods. So you can see here, for example, that the number one most addictive food that was listed in this report was chocolate. So chocolate came out number one in most people. Ice cream was number two. Then we had French fries in number three. Pizza, number four. And notice these are very high fat, very high sugar foods. They're not just skewed one way or the other. They are not, again, these are not just carbs or just fat, but they are carb-fat blends. Cookies, chips, cake, buttered popcorn, cheeseburgers, muffins, breakfast cereals. So now you can see that from 1 to 11, these foods, again, are a lot of blends of fats and sugars. Even breakfast cereals, we'll see, are combinations. Almost every breakfast cereal you buy is not only a ton of sugar, but then there's a bunch of oils that are added as well when they bake those things so that they are nice and crunchy and taste really good. If we go over here, we can see number 12 was gummy candy, fried chicken, soda, not diet, but regular soda, rolls, there's bread and things like that, cheese, pretzels, bacon, crackers, nuts, and 21 was steak. So now the nuts and steak category we maybe could even put over here as far as they're starting to get to where they're some of the least addictive foods. So you can see that even down here, while nuts were at a 20, on a list of 35 foods, that we see that it's still rated really low relative to, say, like chocolate, right? Chocolate was the number one, whereas nuts were 20 in the list. And this is only considered 35 foods. We could speculate or extrapolate that foods that are a similar nutrient kind would have similar effects. For example, we could say that probably chocolate, cookies, and cake, you want to throw in that category, like brownies, right? Brownies would probably fall somewhere in that same area. They'd be very addictive, very difficult to not overeat. So if we go over to this side now, these are some of the worst foods, and that means that when it comes to these foods, and you are eating these things regularly, we're gonna want to come up with strategies to, one, reduce and or eliminate a lot of these foods, or ways of having control so that we don't overeat them. And we'll be talking about this in a whole nother video where we look at swap this for that and food substitutions and little tips and tricks as to how you can, it's not that we don't ever want to eat ice cream again or chocolate or pizza or French fries. We can actually make very healthy, very delicious, very filling versions of these foods. They're just going to be a lot less fat, a lot less sugar, starch, and so on, so that we can feel full while still really enjoying our food. And we'll talk about that in another video. Now, if we come over to this side here, this was the remainder, 23 through 35. And what this actually does is it actually sets us up with a list of foods that make up a really great diet in many respects. These are some of the least addictive foods. I mean, think about it. Number 32 was water. How many people do you know who are like addicted to water, right? So if your 32 is water, cucumber rated less than water. So I mean, people would rather have water than a cucumber, in that sense. Or they'd rather have broccoli, which kind of makes sense, right? Rather have broccoli than they'd rather have water than cucumber, or they'd rather have water than broccoli, or rather have water than beans. So beans actually came out in their particular list as the least addictive. No surprise that the longest lived cultures in the world, and we look at Dan Buettner's research with the blue zones, everyone was eating beans in all those groups. So if you're not already adding beans into your diet or legumes, then this is one you're going to really want to add in. It's one of the highest foods in resistant starch. They're high in fiber, high in protein, and when cooked or sprouted properly, they're very, very nutritious. So you can see on this list that if we go to number 23 and we'll work backwards here, we have eggs, chicken breast, strawberries, apple, corn with no butter, no salt, so this is like corn on the cob, salmon, banana, carrots plain, no seasonings, rice, brown rice plain with no seasonings or sauce, water, cucumber, again plain cucumber, broccoli, and beans with no sauce. So we're not talking like baked beans with sugar and pork and so on, but just plain beans. So what we see is that when foods are prepared very simply, and not to say that we can't use spices and make things taste good, but what we're trying to avoid is the sugars and the fats and the oils and all that kind of stuff. We're going to be able to create very big, filling, volumetrics type meals that are going to be very, very yummy. So we could literally begin to pick from these foods and say, we could take salmon, some corn on the cob with some salmon, maybe some cooked carrots, a salad with cucumber, broccoli, maybe some garbanzo beans. We can make a nut-based dressing to go over the top of that. That would be really good with some spices and vinegar. We could do a dessert with fruit, and we can make some really yummy desserts. Let's see what else. We could take like our chicken and we could combine that with our brown rice and some vegetables, right? Like a chicken, broccoli, some crushed garlic, and we can make some like really yummy dishes there. So there's all sorts of ways that we can combine these. Now, this isn't a comprehensive list. This is just something I wanted to point out because it was part of this overall study. But in our next video, we'll look at what are some of the best foods for weight loss, and we'll kind of rank them as well from worst to best to worst as far as when it comes to weight loss. So anyways, that being said, I hope you found this video helpful. Remember, these are the foods that we want to work on eliminating and or at least reducing and coming up with better substitutions. I look forward to talking to you in the next video.